Welcome to the Landscaping Podcast. My name is Joel Barnett and I'm your host. And in today's episode, I'm talking with Garry Ashton from the Aussie Lawnstars. Gary is working in the lawn and gardening business and also has a podcast which he's been going for about 2.5 years, a similar time to mine. He's had about 140, 150 guests on there. And I absolutely love talking to him. So it was a really fun chat, talking about not only the business but life as well. So there's a lot of lessons in both that hopefully some people might be able to take out of the episode. One of his more recent episodes was with Clint Adams, who we've had on this podcast as a guest, and he spoke to him purely in that episode about employees. And Garry spoke about how when he put an employee on, he learnt the hard way about not allowing enough for them. So, what you're paid the employees, not how much you need to charge out for them. And so he explains how he learnt the hard way and what he should have been charging. And as I mentioned, we touch on a couple of more sort of life lessons as well, talking about how the way you look at things is a reflection of what happens, and also that the harder you work, the luckier you get. So yeah, plenty of good things to take out of this episode with Garry. So hopefully you enjoy this chat with Garry Ashton. Garry, thank you for joining us on the Landscaping Podcast. My first question for you is, how did you start in the industry?
How did I start? I bought a business off a friend. So it's going back 2010 is when I did this, April 2010. And for your listeners, I'm in the maintenance business. So I'm out there cutting grass and doing gardening. In April in Australia is not a great time to start.
It's a bit cooler. Is that what were you doing before? Like what sort of industry were you in before you took over?
All right. Don't email me, don't message me, don't call me about my previous work, please. I was an insurance case manager for workers' compensation.
One of my mates does that now.
It's an interesting job, and I'm actually happy to talk to people about it. But yeah, obviously you're the least liked person in the insurance industry.
Yeah. Just tracking down people who are doing the wrong thing, basically.
Yeah, well, interestingly, when I was doing it, so we're talking 20 years ago through to 14 years ago, roughly, they had changed the industry so that you weren't allowed to investigate everybody. So you had to take people at their word and assume that they're legitimate, unless you had evidence that gave you reason to investigate them.
So then you had to find that evidence.
Well, that was in 5 years in that industry. I think I investigated one or two people. So yeah, there's not a lot of investigations happening at that point.
All right. Then what made you want to, well, I'm sure there's plenty of reasons, but what made you want to get out of that industry and start in maintenance?
Hey, I've told this story a couple of times on my podcast. And by the way, yeah, I do a podcast for anyone listening.
Aussie Lawnstars.
Aussie Lawnstars. It's how it sounds. Don't go and click the wrong thing. But yeah, when I was working there as a case manager, I prioritized doing good quality work rather than getting my work done quickly. And my team leaders and management didn't really like that. They're like, get more work done, get more work done. And I was like feeling bad because I wasn't getting the work done quick enough. But the largest company I looked after really appreciated that I was really thorough with their claims, and their policy was worth around $1 to $1.5 million. They changed brokers, and their broker said, leave this insurance company, go and join up the other insurance company that they promoted and did most of their work with. It'd make it easier for the broker to have one point of contact. And the company said, no, we really like Garry looking after our workers' comp claims, and he does a really good job. The insurance company was told this, and they said, oh, thank you, Garry. Here's a $50 gift voucher. $1.5 million I saved.
Yeah.
There were a few other things along those lines, but yeah, the stress of the job, everything about it, I was just like, yeah, that was the nail in the coffin. It's time to look at my options. And I'd already considered before I even started that job that maybe one day I should start a lawn care business. And I'd already run a business previously, a few years before that. So I was like, okay, lawn care business is one of the easiest things to get right, doing lawns and gardens.
Is it though?
Well, it's one of the easiest things to get wrong too. So the words I use on my podcast a lot now is it's got a really low barrier to entry.
Yeah.
So anybody can grab 3 tools, take your existing car that you use for running the family around in, chuck those 3 tools in the back of your car and go and mow a lawn. So a lot of people do that. And if all you want to do is earn beer money on a weekend, go and do 3 or 4 lawns, and you've got yourself $100 or a couple $100 that you can chuck into the beer fund or whatever else you might fancy spending that extra cash on that the wife doesn't know about, or your husband doesn't know about if you're a woman out there doing it, and there's quite a few.
And so, how did it go? The conversation come back wanting to buy the business off your mate.
Yeah, so he started the business up and he'd asked me for advice when he started the business. He knew that I already knew a few things and he asked me some questions about equipment and various different things. And I'd given him some advice. And then I mentioned to him that I was going to leave what I was doing and I was very tempted to do the same thing. And he said, oh, I've started looking at selling my business. And we came to an agreement on what we thought it was worth, where we were still mates, and I bought it off him.
And did you keep the name of the business?
No,
So what was
that's
it
the
called then and now?
So he was Sean's Lawns,
That wouldn't make sense if you could take that over.
and I had a lot of trouble trying to come up with a name that, I mean, not as catchy as Sean's Lawns, but a name that was just going to be easy for me to work with. And I came up with Lawns Online because I had this fanciful idea that I could have a really good website. Back then, nobody had a website for a lawn mowing business. So I was like, I can have a really good website and I can market my business through the website. And don't look at my website at the moment. It actually doesn't exist.
That's all
But
right.
yeah, the idea and the business name was all built around that.
Well, it is a good business name because it also leaves you open for potential side tangents of the business as well. Like you could
Like
add,
running a podcast.
yeah, exactly. Or
Yes.
selling things online, like lawn
Yeah.
related.
It certainly does leave the business opportunities quite open. That's good.
So
Yeah.
have you had any employees along the way?
I have, definitely. And I've got quite a few interesting stories about that because that's I actually talked to one of your friends, Clint Adams, just this week with the intention of talking to him about employees and how to employ people well. Because he's got, at last count, he said the highest number of employees he had was towards the end of last year. He had 50 employees. I've had one or two employees at a time. And in the first couple of years, when I started to grow my business and filled my books up, I was like, okay, I'll put on an employee. And the first employee back 14 years ago was worth $20 an hour. And once I did the maths, and I was charging back then around $50 an hour for lawns and then quoting the job rather than giving them the hourly rate. But I worked out that when I paid my employee $20 for the hour, there wasn't much money left over. It was basically running at a loss. And the maths I've told people with this is take that $50 an hour, take almost half of it in expenses. So you're working for about $25 an hour if you're doing the work yourself. And then you've got the unbillable hours to add on to that. So it takes it down to about $10 or $12 an hour. So if I was paying an employee $20 an hour, I'm running at a loss.
Yep.
So yeah, my first experience was exactly that. It was running at a loss, and it took me a couple of years to actually work that out and go, well, I need to be charging more. And I changed my accountants partway through that time frame, and they said you need to be charging at least 70 plus GST. And at that point in time, that was on the money. It was where I needed to be so that I could afford to pay an employee and grow the business.
It's funny 'cause, like when I started, I was like my boss was charging I think 55 an hour per person.
Yeah,
And then when I took over the business, he gave me advice on how to like a spreadsheet on how to work out what my hourly rate should be. So it's the same kind of stuff that people are sending around these days. I had that back then.
yeah,
Um, and I worked out it didn't need to be anywhere near that much. But I thought, well, if he's charging that, I might as well charge as well because people are paying it. I'll charge 55 an hour.
yeah,
So it was all going well then. And then as the years go on, people say you should be charging X amount. I thought that's really expensive. There's no way I could charge that much. And then
yeah.
here we are. I'm charging like double what they told me I should be charging. So when you realize what you really need to charge, because it changes as your business changes.
Yes, it does. And there's a lot of factors here, right? But with a service business where I don't have to buy a lot of materials, so I've still got insurance and fuel and equipment to buy. And Clint and I were talking about this week. It's somewhere around 3 to 4 times the wage is what you should be charging somebody. So if you're paying a wage for lawn mowing and gardening, it's going to be somewhere around $30 to $35 an hour at the moment, as high as $40 or $45 an hour if they're team leader material. And that means you should be charging somewhere around $120 to $160 an hour in this in today's economy.
Yeah. And that's for so does that take into account the travel time? Because that's the biggest issue I see in like lawn mowing businesses
Yeah.
and garden maintenance is the travel between the project.
It's
Can you
interesting you say that because when I started, I was doing all residential jobs. And as I got moving, I took on more and more commercial and industrial jobs. So at one stage, I had a cemetery which I would spend a day a week at. And when I quoted the cemetery, I was looking at that going, I need to make sure I'm quoting more, not less. And you're going, hang on a minute, we're talking about travel time, right? No travel time to account for because there's 5 minutes from home, travel to get there, 5 minutes to get back home again, and maybe another 5 minutes to go and grab some lunch from the takeaway if you didn't bring lunch with you. But I sat down and looked at that one and I was like, okay, I've got a ride on mower. On an average day on residential jobs, that ride on mower gets used for 20 minutes per job. At the cemetery, it's getting used for 5 hours, 6 hours straight. So travel time is one of the factors that does come up. And if you're doing a lot of small jobs, then more travel time or more unbillable time. So you have to increase your hourly rate to accommodate that. So I'm now working purely on industrial commercial sites, and that means I don't pay my employees to get to and from work. They get paid for the time they're working. And I'm also working on site. I'm still on the tools myself. So currently I have one employee working with me and myself on the tools. And because of that, I don't have to account for travel time. And I've calculated and talked to Luke Smith about this, another shout out for another podcaster, Luke Smith, Aussie Lawns and Gardens. We're talking about the reduction in rates when you don't have travel. And we sort of concurred around the between $75 and $100 an hour is probably going to cover you if you don't have a lot of lost time traveling. So currently I'm somewhere in that range for the jobs that I'm quoting when I'm doing the industrial commercial work and I don't have travel time. If you are having travel time, and there's always a lot of variables here, right? In this industry, if you're running around with a push mower, a whippersnipper and a blower, the three tools I mentioned before, and you're putting them in the back of your Kia hatchback, you can probably run a little leaner than I can run. If you're running a ride-on mower and you got a trailer and you're using more fuel and you got 4 employees, then every time you move in between jobs, you've got a lot of lost billable time and higher expenses in general. So I see people at the moment who are getting around the $75 to $80 plus GST, and they're successful. And I see other people that are claiming as much as $250 an hour. I ask people when they're on my podcast, let's talk about a few different numbers. Are you talking your hourly rate? Is that how you quote the job? And then how much do you make per person per day or per week or per month or per year? And that's a great equalizer because once you start going, well, in the lawn care industry, per person should be pushing around $600 a day at the moment. And a lot of people are hitting $1,000 plus a day per person.
I think that's what you should be charging for them.
Yeah. So how much you charge per person per day? If you go back to that hourly rate that we were talking about, say $100 an hour, they do 8 hours a day. That's 800 plus GST per person. And that's a pretty good rate to aim for. 600 is the low side. 1,000, 1,200 is up the upper end. And I know one person, he's working on his own. I was talking to him recently. He was quoting between $1,000 and $2,000 a day. And he said he's regularly doing 1,500 a day. So that's where he wants to be. And he's running 2 massive big diesel zero-turn mowers. So his equipment costs are up there. But yeah, that works well for him.
Yeah. And it's also, especially when you're quoting projects, it's almost irrelevant what you're charging per hour if you're not allowing enough, enough time to do the project.
Yeah. So I guess that's something that comes up in this industry because most people are looking at jobs that are residential or half a day at the most. There's not a lot of people like myself who are sitting on one site an extended period of time. I can just sit there and go, okay, I've got one employee plus myself, one place, and therefore I can quote how much to do that job for an entire month at a time. And I can get the number really accurate. But if you're doing the average lawn care and gardening job, it can be as little as 5 minutes on one job.
Mm.
And if you're doing a 5-minute job and then you're doing 20 of them back to back, then you've got a lot of lost time in between those jobs. that you've got to account for. And it gets a little bit murkier how you actually set, say, your minimum price. Because yeah, if you turn up to do a job and you go, well, I'm going to be there all the time, then my minimum price is what it's worth to be there. But if I turn up to do a half-hour job and I've got an extra 15 minutes to allow for the travel in between that job and the next job, then that's a 45-minute job. So I really need to allow for my minimum price covering that travel time plus a certain amount of work. So a lot of people just have a minimum price that's pretty close to their hourly rate. Some of them will drop it to about half an hour, but yeah, typically it's about what they would get for an hour's work.
Yep. Yeah, I always love talking to maintenance folks because they always seem so really dialed in on their productivity rates and hourly rates, what they need to charge more so than other people, I think.
Yeah, well, they need to be. But I talk to people across the range. Some of them are not quite as dialed in as others because I'm very happy to see the industry have that full range of people in there. I would like to pass jobs on to somebody who doesn't want the commercial site where they're there full time. So if they want to take on a job where I look at it and I go, I'm not going to be profitable if I quote that job, they're quite happy to do it. And that covers what we loosely term cowboys and fly-by-nighters, all those sorts of things. And I'm glad they're part of the industry.
Yep. Yeah, most people start out like that.
Yeah. Whereas when you start going into your side of the industry, the more hardscape, landscaping, all those sorts of things, the cowboys can do a fair bit of damage, I'm sure.
I still think it's exactly the same. There's still people who don't want to, like not everyone's my client. Is what I'm trying to
Yeah.
say. Like, there's people who
Yes.
don't want to spend 150 grand on their landscaping. So
Yeah.
yeah, and there's like I've spoken to guys who's working on a couple of doors up from me. He goes, I love the stuff that you do, but I'm just happy doing this kind of basic stuff, just steppers and lawn and garden beds and just all the basics that you do at the start.
Yeah.
And there's no point in me going to do those projects because all the overheads I've got to charge to keep the business running, other people don't have to charge that. So it's, yeah,
Yeah.
not everyone needs to be at the top end.
And I can really appreciate this because a few years ago, I had this wild, crazy idea that I should buy a machine. So I'm not talking just a lawnmower, I'm talking an excavator. Bought a little 1.7 ton Hitachi secondhand, paid $20,000 for it. I built a trailer from scratch. So it gives you a bit of an idea of the spare time that I had, even though I was pretty busy. Built the trailer from scratch and floated this machine around to do jobs in winter when I wasn't busy lawn mowing. And I could very quickly see that the costs of running a machine like that, which going back to what you're saying, you turn up to do a landscaping job, you got to pick jobs where you're utilizing your tools and your staff to run the business the way that's really efficient for you.
Mm.
And I got rid of that excavator in the end because I could only use it in winter and I couldn't market it very successfully to just pick up jobs in winter. I could get some work. I think I got about $5,000 to $10,000 per year out of that excavator, and I did the maths with it. And my wife was already unhappy that I had this machine sitting there for 9 months of the year not getting used. And I was like, yeah, the math says get rid of it.
Yeah. It's funny. I was just looking at an excavator yesterday, and then we hired a machine yesterday, but like it's just a mini digger, not an excavator, like a
Yeah.
mini skid steer.
Yep.
And like what if I had an excavator, I wouldn't have had to hire it, so you can use a different machine for different purposes. But
Yeah.
also, like I said to one of the guys, we've got 600 meters of paving coming up. So the excavator is not going to be very handy for paving, so it wouldn't be doing anything for that. So there's times when it's handy and there's times when it's not. So you've got to work out how often you're going to use it and if
Yeah.
enough makes sense.
I should have seen the writing on the wall when I bought that excavator, but I was, you know, excited to buy a tool.
Yeah.
I hired a trencher, and hiring the trencher was the clincher for me that said, yep, it's worth getting the excavator. I can use the excavator for trenching. I should have said, no, that's the reason not to get the excavator because I can hire a trencher for a fraction of the cost of the
Yeah.
excavator.
Yeah. And if it breaks, if something goes wrong with it, you just take it back to where you hired
Yeah.
it from.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, I'd hired a couple of excavators before that, and then I'd hired the trencher, and I was like, yep, I'm confident there's work out there for me. And then once I bought it, I was like, yeah, there is work out there, but it's just not justifiable to have $20,000 worth of machinery sitting there not getting used and needing maintenance.
Yeah. Yeah. If you were going to just be doing that kind of work, yeah, it'd be fine, but not if you're
Easy.
going to be mowing lawns for 9 months a year.
Well, yeah, unless I put on staff to keep the excavator busy during
Yep.
summer, it wasn't worth it for me.
Yep.
Yeah.
Then when you bought the business off your mate, I assume it was residential around, was it?
Yeah, so the majority of the work was residential, or all of it was residential, really. But some of it was split between private customers and real estates. He had built relationships with one in particular real estate, but he'd also talked to a couple of other real estates. So there was a little bit of income that would come in at the end of the month from the real estate agents, and then cash come in from the private jobs.
And
Yeah.
then how did you go about transitioning out of the residential? Did you sell those ones off? Because I see that's a big thing in the lawn care world, is selling rounds or parts of rounds.
Yeah, look, I wanted to sell it off. When I moved out of residential, I had a fairly successful residential run that had been established for well over 10 years. So I wanted to sell it off, but the opportunity I had to move into only industrial commercial work, I had to make the move on, and I had 4 weeks to clear my books and go straight into it. And 4 weeks is not enough to sell the business.
Hmm.
So I had two or three people that were interested in that time. None of them could actually come through with what we would talk about. And then either they didn't want to come through or they couldn't come through with it. And so it was a case of going, all right, I've just got to clear my books, get rid of all of those residential customers, and gave them away to other local businesses,
Yeah.
which is it's a real shame. I estimated that value to be somewhere between 25 and $50,000 worth of business to sell, because I would have been at the low end. It would have been, here you give me a check, there's your list of customers, off you go. At the high end, it would have been a handover with 2 or 3 months handover and equipment included in the deal.
And what was it, just a good opportunity to go into the commercial work?
Yeah. Well, at that point in time, I'd already split my run between some residential and some commercial work. So I'd had the cemetery I referred to earlier, and I'd done work with a couple of daycares and a few other businesses around town. And I had a really tight, compact route. So it meant that I was only ever traveling 10 minutes from home, which great for productivity.
Hmm.
But yeah, the more commercial work I did, the less I liked the residential jobs.
What was it about them that you liked less?
Well, and from this perspective now, it's very generalizing to say I don't like residential jobs, because there's good and there's bad. But when you get a residential customer that doesn't understand what you need to be efficient, it frustrates you. And then you start generalizing about all residential jobs are a bit frustrating. And it's like, well, the commercial jobs, I don't have to deal with that as much. So I looked at it and I thought, yep, that makes a lot of sense for me to drop all of my residential work and just keep the commercial work.
Is it a higher income in commercial?
Not necessarily. So a lot of people do think that, but there's also, and give you a bit of a comparison, in commercial work, you'll have cowboys doing it all the way through to green options and, the massive big companies that are $1 million companies or multi-million-dollar companies that are running 100 or 200 or 300 employees out there doing those jobs. So it can be really competitive on that commercials market. A lot of people don't understand what it means to put in a tender. It's like, no, I put in a quote. Now, do you know what the difference between a quote and a tender is?
Yeah, it's a similar in the landscaping world, but there is more money to be made in commercial, but there's also more risk, and it's also less
Yeah,
enjoyable to a lot of people working in it
yeah.
because it's a lot more heartless. But one of the things that keeps a lot of people out, apart from doing tenders and all the having to have all your ducks in a row and all that sort of thing, but is the I can never remember what it's called, but basically the person you're working for keeps a certain percentage, like it might be 10% of the amount they owe you for two
Yep.
years until there's a maintenance period done.
Yep.
So you're doing $1 million project, they're going to keep 100 grand for 2 years. So, and then
That's a
then
hard pill to swallow.
yeah, provided they're still in business in that 2 years, then they'll give it to you.
Wow. Yeah, it makes it hard. So with maintenance, look at the garden that's behind you on the screen here at the moment. That's one of your gardens that you've done, I'm
Yeah,
going to
at the
guess.
garden show. Yeah.
I was going to say, I'm pretty sure I've seen that picture there before. Something like that, if I go and do that job to maintain the garden, I'm invested in it.
Yeah.
If Green Options sends out 2 or 3 employees and they spend a half hour rushing around like hacksaws and cutting it up, the employee mentality of those guys is not quite the same as somebody who's running a small business. So that's where, for me, taking on those large commercial contracts makes a lot of sense because I've got that personal touch. I'm invested in making sure that these people who are considering dumping an employee to put it out for a company to manage instead, they know they're going to see an improvement in quality, not a drop in quality. So that's one of the key reasons why a small lawn care and gardening business can win a large contract. I guess the other reason is because there is room to negotiate on large contracts. A lot of the guys, the larger businesses, are going to quote really lean, and it's hard to compete with them.
Yeah.
Some of them don't quote so lean, but if you build that personal relationship with the company that you're dealing with, they can see the value in paying a little bit more to have somebody that they can call me personally and say, hey, what's going on here? Or can you sort this bit out? Can you do this extra bit? And they know they're talking to the person responsible for getting the job done. It's not going to get handed down through three different levels of management and message doesn't actually get through, or they get red-dyed wood chip when they asked for pine bark.
Yeah, that makes a big difference, especially like when they are talking to you and you're the one on site, not just there's not no Chinese whispers going on where people are
Yeah.
losing communication.
Yeah, that's right. It, so yeah, for me, I'm happy to do that. And there's been a couple of times I've looked at it over the last 2 years. It's 2.5 years I've been podcasting now. And in that time, I've gone, well, I could potentially take on more work, put on more employees by going back and doing residential work as well. But I guess there's a little bit of comfort in staying where I am and then gives me better time to focus on podcasting and helping other people's businesses.
So yeah, well, I remember hearing in the early days that you were when you were doing the podcast because I listened to probably a lot of the same North American ones that you listened to, and I
Yeah.
heard you were part of the Mr. Producer stable back when you started.
I
Was that right
started
when you
with Mr.
started?
Producer, yes. I really happy with the work that he did, but at a point in time I was realized I could save myself time and effort by doing a lot of that work myself. So it's not that he was not doing good quality for me. He was doing great. It was just a case of going, okay, I'm investing time in preparing the edit for him to then go through and do the final edit and audio balancing. And yeah, I reached a point where I was like, he's great value, but I want to save a few dollars, and I'm actually saving time by doing all the full process whilst I'm in there anyway.
Yeah, yeah, because he's a producer who does a lot of the green industry people's podcasts in America.
Yes. Oh
Um,
yeah.
so how
Yeah.
did you just had you been listening to them? So then when you started yours, you thought that I'll start off on the right foot and get him to do it as well.
Yeah. Well, when I first started listening to podcasts for the green industry, Julio Tomei is in Canada. He was one of the first ones that I found. And I listened to him, and then he interviewed this guy called Paul Jameson. And if you don't know who Paul Jameson is, look up the Green Industry Podcast. And he's probably the most popular podcast. He does one a day, 5 days a week. And Paul Jameson, when he started doing his podcast, he already was friends with Mr. Producer because he'd worked in the radio studio with him. So he kept talking about this guy, Mr. Producer, and acted like he was talking to Mr. Producer in the middle of his episodes. And I was like, it's interesting. And after listening to Paul Jameson for a while, I was like, he brings a lot more value to podcasting than Julio Tomei was on his own. The dynamics of having different people in the industry over in the US there adds value, not detracts value. And I was like, all right, I can see that when Julio does an interview with another person that's in business, I want to hear that episode every time. Whereas when he's talking on his own, I found it a little bit hit and miss whether I could concentrate, whether I was enjoying it, whether I was getting good value out of it or not. And then same with Paul Jameson. I was like, okay, initially every episode Paul Jameson did, I want to listen to it and I'm getting value out of it. And then I started going, okay, there's some things he says which are purely American when they're in winter or when they're quoting weekly or when they're doing various different aspects of the job. There's some unique American aspects to that. And again, every time he did an interview, I wanted to hear it regardless of whether I got everything out of it or not. It was still valuable because listening to somebody else who's in business adds a new dynamic, a new perspective. And even though Paul was really good, the extra perspective was better. So I thought, all right, all I'm going to do with my podcast is interview people in Australia that are running a lawn care business.
So, and you haven't interviewed anyone from overseas?
I have. I've done a couple of interviews with people overseas, and that's been typically somebody who's in the podcasting industry already. And they've been great value because they've got that perspective of, I want to help other people be successful in business. So Keith Kalfas is one of those ones that stands out. The interview with him was unreal because I don't know if you're spiritual or not. I'm a Christian, all right? But when you start talking about things that Keith Kalfas talks about, he talks about changing your mindset. So it's getting almost into a spiritual nature of starting to think about what's going on in the greater world and the greater good and going, okay, when I'm in business, I've got to stop thinking like an employee. I've got to start thinking like a manager. I've got to start thinking like an accountant. I've got to start shifting my mindset according to what I'm doing so that I can get the outcome that I need. So yeah, that particular episode with Keith Kalfas, highly recommend anybody go and listen to that one.
How long ago was that, do you reckon?
Oh,
Early days?
yeah, early days, definitely. It's going to be back in the archives. I may have to republish it even so that it's available for people.
All right. Yeah, like this, the garden that's in my background, that was the title of that garden was called Mindset because I'm big on
Yeah.
how powerful your mindset can be in how happy you are.
Oh, look, even though I believe in God and we can go down that spiritual path, I'm happy to talk about it. But this is not what your podcast or my podcast is about, which is why I don't spend a lot of time talking about God. But if you talk about the power you have in yourself to change everything around you, it makes so much sense to go, okay, if I look at life as a victim, I am giving up 99% of the power I have in myself. If I look at my business from the point of view of an employee, it's nothing. I'm missing out on 99% of what I can do in business. And that's what a lot of people, particularly in the lawn care industry, start out with is I don't like being an employee for somebody else. I'm going to be an employee for myself. So yeah, that whole learning to adapt your mindset, your perspective, and a psychological podcast I listened to talked about perspective shifting. And it's like that is it. Mindset is all about perspective shifting.
Yeah. Yeah, there's an awesome Instagram reel that I came across with Theo Von when he interviewed Tony Robbins.
Yeah.
And he's talking about basically if you whenever I quote something, I'm always horrific at quoting it exactly, so it probably
Yeah,
makes
me
no
too.
sense.
Yeah.
But he was talking about like he told him to close his eyes and picture everything he can see in the room that's brown,
Yeah.
and then he said, "All right, now open your eyes, and how many things did you see that were red?" And they said, "Well, didn't see, he only saw things that are brown." So then he goes, "All right, now close your eyes and tell me all the things that you can see that are blue." And then he does a similar thing. And then he was saying basically when he was saying wanting to see things that were brown, he was saying, I bet you saw things that were kind of like a tan or cream and you convinced yourself that they're brown
Yeah.
because you wanted to see brown.
Yep.
And then when you were looking for blue, then you see blue because you'll see what you want to see.
Yeah.
So if you see negativity, or if you're thinking, or if you're looking for negativity, that's what you're going to see. And
Yeah.
if you're thinking poorly about yourself all the time, then you'll see things that make you look poor.
Yep.
So yeah, that's
Yeah.
massive.
Yeah. Well, I know a few people who have, from a very early age, been a victim. And it's tragic, right? The fact that they have been a victim of something horrific. But when they see the whole world through those eyes of, I'm a victim of everything happening to me, they're powerless to take themselves out of that victim mentality and be in control of what's going on around them. Not, you can't control everything, but if you're in that victim mentality, you can't control anything.
Yeah.
So There's another podcast I've listened to which is all about business startups, and we're talking different scale when you talk startups, right? We're not talking about somebody who's starting a lawn care business. You're talking about the person who started Qantas, the person who started Spotify, the person who started Netflix, and they interview those people. And at the end of the interviews, they ask, "What is it that made you successful? Was it luck or hard work?" And without a doubt, the answer will be you have to work hard in order for luck to happen. If you sit on your couch at home and you don't put any effort in, don't expect to be running a multi-billion-dollar business sitting at home, not even dreaming about running a business. But if you get out there and you try and you create a business and then you learn from other people and you seek mentors and you make sure you're pointing in the right direction, luck might just happen to you.
Mm. Yeah, I think it was Ian Barker, who was the previous guest. Again, I can't remember the quote exactly, but he was talking about that you need to be lucky. You need to have luck, but
Yeah,
you've also got to work hard when you get those opportunities that come from luck. So
yeah,
it's all, they work
100%.
together.
Yeah.
So with the podcast in North America, were you like, do you listen to a fair few of them and sort of getting tips from there on how to do your own?
I definitely did in the early days. Nowadays, I don't spend as much time listening to the North American podcasts because I'm so busy listening to Australian content. There's some really good Australian content out now.
So what are some of the North American ones you listened to in the early days?
So the first one I mentioned already was the one for Julio Tomei,
Yep.
and then straight into Paul Jameson's one from there. Then there's Keith Kalfas and just trying to think, the Green Grind, Ballard Industries.
Yep.
And there's one other one. I'm just trying to think of his name. I've got a mental blank at the moment.
Caleb Orman's been a guest on here.
Yeah,
Kid Contract, the podcast.
I have listened to some of Caleb's, and there's different things in each of those podcasts, isn't there, that really stand out and make me go, well, America has 300 million people in the population. Australia has a whisker under 10% of that. So we're just under 30 million. So whatever they do, we can do on a different scale. So if they're doing it really well, and you listen to Caleb and you go, okay, his unique slant on podcasting is really impressive. But he's targeting a specific nature of what it means to be in business or a particular type of business. If I jump ship and I go and listen to somebody else, Corey Ballard, I really like listening to Corey because he is looking for the top 1% of people who are doing it really well. And then I like listening to Julio Tomei because he's talking to the everyday person. There's quite a few opportunities to look at different things. I think one of the desires I've got is to actually go over to the US when they're doing some of their trade shows. So you can go over for Equip Expo, which is like their biggest trade show ever. But the ones that seem interesting to me that I think would be easy to replicate in Australia would be the trade shows around developing your own business skills, or the other one they call Together in the Trades. So lawn care entrepreneurs, I think is one of the ones they call it.
Oh, yeah, Brian Fullerton does that one.
Yeah, Brian Fullerton does Lawntrepreneur. That's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of things they do which are awesome. And I saw that the last episode that you released, which might be a couple of weeks ago now, but it was Ben or BJ from that
Yeah,
podcast.
so that was BJ.
Yeah.
And he's been pioneering the Land and Lawn Equip Expo in Australia. So
Yeah.
he's going to do 3 shows this year, one in Brisbane, or the first one will be in Brisbane, the 6th of July. The second one's going to be down in Melbourne on the 27th of July. Double check these dates and fact check them, please.
I might see
And
if I
then
can get him on as well to talk about him.
yeah, awesome. And then the final one's going to be I think it's the 17th of August in Sydney. So if you can make it to Brisbane, Melbourne, or Sydney for one of those shows, you'll be lots of equipment, lots of sausages, lots of fun, lots of contractors, and hopefully fine weather.
I thought you were talking about the sausages because there's so many men in the industry, in the lawn care industry. But
Look, there's always a bit of humor mixed in with the podcasts, and Ben and BJ, their humor started to be reasonable and quite good, and then after about 2 or 3 episodes of their podcast, it just hit the gutter and it's stayed there ever since.
I think Luke Smith as well. He's doing a road show. He's going on a holiday with his
Yeah.
family, but he's going to be doing similar things in
Yep.
various spots around the country, which will be exciting.
Yeah, so the timing of his road show is going to coincide with all of those shows happening up the East Coast. So he's
Yeah,
actually going to end up on the East Coast around the same time. And I think the understanding is that he's going to try and coordinate so he can be at least one, maybe two, if not all three of BJ's shows.
yep, yeah. It's cool that they're doing that. I love it.
Yeah.
Because I've always been listening to all the different shows that they've done in America,
Yeah.
and yeah, and wishing that they did something like that here. Like there's the landscape show, which they do in Melbourne, but
Yeah.
that's about all there is. It's just
Yeah.
the
I've been thinking about getting down to the landscape show in Melbourne because even though I'm doing maintenance, all the people that are at the landscape shows have got gardens like you've designed. And I think that for me in maintenance, it's really good to go to places like that to be able to talk to people like yourself and get ideas for the commercial landscapes that I'm looking after. Because let's face it, the landscape that I'm looking after, commercial site, is 1 or 2 bars under hosting weddings. And it's like, I can transform that. But looking at what you've got behind you, looking at your designs and not stealing off you, but getting ideas and going, okay, I could do little things to improve that and get it up to that level where people would want to host weddings on that site, even though it's a commercial industrial site. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's like there's a lot of wedding themes like that anyway. That they're out in farm sheds and all sorts of things like that. So
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
it makes sense. And there's a lot of things at the landscape show that are kind of commercially. That's where they're targeted anyway, as
Yes.
well. So yeah, I
Yeah.
reckon it'd probably be worthwhile.
Oh, definitely. That's it's one of those things I've had in my bucket list, like going over to America to the Equip Expo, is also getting down to Melbourne for the landscape show.
So whereabouts are you based?
Newcastle. So
Yeah,
it's an hour out of Sydney.
yeah. I often compare Newcastle to Newcastle's like the Geelong of New South Wales because we're
Yeah.
now out of Melbourne,
Yeah,
second
definitely.
biggest city in the state.
Yeah, for sure.
But the Landscape Association, they just did their own version of the landscape show this year for the first time, I think. Did,
Okay. So is that in Sydney?
yeah,
Yeah, I'll have to look that one up as well then. The,
yeah,
in Sydney, they've had the Diesel Dirt and Turf show, which is probably the closest thing to a equipment show for lawn care contractors. They often will have 1 or 2 brands of lawn mowing gear there. Typically, they have the bigger toys, your 200 plus ton machines, yeah, or your 20-ton excavators
yep,
and all truck hauling and all those big heavy tools.
yeah. So what is so is Ben and BJ's, is that them, is that both of them doing that road shows or just BJ?
It is specifically BJ. I know Ben will likely accompany him, but I'm not sure if Ben's going to be able to get to all 3 shows. But
Yeah,
yeah,
okay.
BJ is the brains and the coordinator of the show.
Right. And is he looking to do, is it similar to what Luke's doing in terms of getting sponsors on there who are going to showcase their products?
Different because Luke's primary purpose is to meet contractors in small groups, whereas BJ's primary purpose is to get as many brands as possible in one place for contractors to be able to see all of the tools and play with the tools and be tools.
Yeah, there with that. I reckon they both sound awesome. So yeah,
Yeah,
like I said, I love that they're doing it.
yeah,
And yeah, and like you said, look, we're less than 10% of the size of America, but I think we're about above our average in terms of what we do. Like when you look at the number of people who are doing podcasts here compared to over there, it's certainly not 10% of the
yeah.
people.
That's it. So yeah, I agree with you. I think we're batting way above our average. And there's a couple of things you look at different between the two countries, and you're okay. In America, when they start a lawn care business, it's really easy for them to go and pay somebody who's an immigrant $12 an hour to cut the grass for them. So it's really easy to upscale and go, well, I can work on my own, but I can really easily have a team of 10 people there and scale the business really quickly. In Australia, at the moment, you're going to be paying probably $30 an hour for an employee to push a mower around to do some hedge trimming. And then if they're in charge of a team of 2 or 3 people, you're going to pay them $35, $40 an hour.
Yeah, it's a big step putting on the first employee,
Yeah.
but yeah, I reckon it certainly is a good thing because even in both all industries, they're all very labor intensive, so you don't want to be doing everything yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I find it really daunting to put on the first employee because you've got to know your numbers before you do it. And I've made that mistake of putting on my first employee and running at a loss. So you've got to be able to look at it and go, is it profitable to put on an employee? And not just use the word profitable. We go, okay, after I paid the employee, after I've paid my expenses, after I've done everything, there's money for me for the effort I've put in to actually do that. So
Yeah.
that's the first step. And then the second step of putting on employees is realizing that you're not just replacing your job that you didn't like with a job that you do like. You're now stepping into a job which has 10 different hats. If you want to do it, get your head around all of those things. And if you still want to do it, go for it. And there's plenty of people who are happy to mentor you and get it right. But if you just wing it and give it a shot, chances are you'll pull back after a season and go, well, that was a waste of time, money, and effort and emotion, and drop it and go back to being on your own.
Mm. Have you had a mentor all along the way?
Oh, look, I've sought mentorship from a number of people. So I haven't had one mentor specifically, but I have accumulated a great resource by talking to 144 people on my podcast. And some of those people I've specifically reached out to afterwards, or some of them have reached out to me and said, hey, let's talk about how things are going. And so I've got a lot of help from doing that. And I've had a lot of people ask me for help as well.
Yeah.
Do you get that as well? Do you get a lot of people reaching out to you because you're podcasting?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love it. Yeah. That's one of the things I didn't see happening when I started the podcast.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's awesome. And you get to you meet so many people. Like when I went to the garden show the last couple of years or the last few years, I was meeting people there like who I'd had on the podcast and never met them in person, as
Yeah.
well as other people just coming up saying they love the podcast. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's just awesome.
Yeah. Well, BJ did a show last year. That was his first one before he decided he was going to do it on repeat. And I put the effort in to get up to that show in Brisbane. And it was about half a day. Like we met up there early in the morning and stayed there till just after lunch. I think it would end up being 2 or 3 in the afternoon by the time I left there. I bought a cup of coffee at the start of the day before everyone turned up. I didn't get a morsel of food. I think I had a bottle of water that I found somewhere that I'd managed to drink so I didn't die from dehydration. But I didn't get a morsel of food because I was so busy talking to all the people that wanted to say hello from the show. Just, yeah, flat out. And it's insane, isn't it? Once you go, I don't see myself as a celebrity. I don't see myself as being an influencer. I just see myself as the average person. And yeah, going to a show like that, it's like, just blows you away. The amount of people that want to shake your hand, say hello. And yeah, I felt rude just because I couldn't get to everyone.
Yeah, but that's also like it's as much as we would like to get to everyone. It's an awesome feeling
Yeah.
that people appreciate what you're doing because it's a fair bit of
Yeah.
work that goes into it.
Yeah. And it's really humbling too. I wouldn't say that I'm the best person to mentor somebody else, but the amount of people that ask me and trust me to do that is insane. And it's really humbling because knowing when to say I don't have the answer, but I recommend you talk to somebody else is really powerful. Yeah, a lot of people come to me and ask me questions about, oh, I want to buy a business, and what do you recommend I do? And I said, yeah, I talk to Matt Palfrey down in South Australia
What's he do?
because he's specialized in buying other lawn care businesses and growing his by buying more and buying more. And so I'm like, if you want to know about buying a business, he's got that wealth of experience, way more than I do.
Yeah, yeah. There's one thing about of knowing what you know, but also knowing what you don't know and knowing who the person who does know that is a valuable thing as well.
Exactly. And I mean, if I ask you, turn around, look at that picture behind you, and name all of the plants in the picture, I'm sure you probably could, right? But I can't. So when I want to know, I think I can see some lavender in the garden there.
No,
I've
you're off
got
to a
one of
bad
them.
start already. It's a salvia.
Oh, there you go. Right. So if I want to know what I'm buying, I'll ask you or the nursery.
Yeah.
I know enough to be dangerous. So no more limits. Go and ask the experts. Get it right.
So
Makes a
what's
world of
coming up?
difference.
What's in the
But
future for the podcast? Do you have any plans on a big episode 200 when it comes up?
I should do. I did a big one for episode 100, and
You had your
I
wife on
think,
there, that one, was it?
yeah, that's the one. Yeah, so it was that was good, and she was a little bit reluctant, but I think it paid off. It was really good value having her share that one. But yeah, episode 200. So we're at probably just over a year till we hit the 200th episode at the moment. So
Yeah.
I'll have to start talking to sponsors and see if we can drum up another giveaway.
So have you done giveaways? Did you do that on your 100th?
I did a giveaway on the 100th. We managed to get Bush Ranger and Ego and Cox mowers and just trying to think there was one other one I'm sure that managed to get quite a few items to give away. That was great.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, but it's interesting because all of those brands were happy to get on board for a giveaway. It's evidence that obviously we've got some traction and that they all appreciate the value that we bring to the industry.
Yeah, Luke says he gets a lot of like the launch head gets a lot of people contacting them through his podcast. That's what's his main sponsor.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And I think the reason he's so successful with that is because in WA, they need to use product on their lawns. On the East Coast, we get enough rain through the season that most people are going to have green grass whether they use product or not. So it's 50-50. If you're running a fly by the seat of your pants business, you probably have never thought about it until a customer says, oh, my grass has died from army grubs. And then you go, oh, how about Bathrin? No, can't find that anymore. What do I need? And so, yeah, if you're on the East Coast, you might have had the opportunity to use a variety of products using fertilizers and broadleaf treatments and Roundup and insect treatments, all those sorts of things. Or you might have just been winging it and have no idea. Whereas West Coast, if they didn't use product from the lawn shed, then they don't have a lawn.
Yeah, right. Because they got the sand and it all just everything just goes through it.
Oh, it's a desert.
Yeah.
I went over there and visited Luke, and I visited some of the other contractors that are doing really well with their cylinder mowers. There's suburbs where the cylinder mowers are working fantastic. The irrigation, or can't call it irrigation, right? I'll get
Retech.
shot. Yeah. Yeah, it's working flawlessly. The product on the lawn is keeping it green. Everything's working seamlessly. You go 2 suburbs away from that, and it looks like a desert because they don't water their grass. They don't have product. One of the places Luke took me to was a new subdivision, and the houses that have been built, the lawns looked fantastic. And then across the road, it looked like a desert, just sand, nothing growing. Yeah, they rely on irrigation from groundwater to be able to do that well.
Yeah, it's complete. Like Australia is a big country, so it makes sense that everything can be so extreme, but it's
Yeah.
so different the way they do things over there.
Well, you're in the Melbourne suburbs, right?
Nah,
Yeah.
it's like that's like saying Newcastle's in Sydney.
There you go.
So where,
Right.
yeah,
So in Victoria, your weather is so crazy, I wouldn't want to live there.
that's pretty consistent. Don't get as much rain as you.
Right. Well, I was talking to a friend the other day and they were saying it was like 7 or 8 degrees in the middle of the day. And I'm like, right, I'm glad I'm up here where it's still 15 to 25.
Yeah, I find Noosa I don't mind that weather there. So it's pretty
Yeah.
decent.
Yeah. But probably the marker for us, and I think this is be interesting to see what you've got to say on this, but it gets cold enough here, and it seems across Australia this is almost universal, but I find it here really consistent. This time of year, and I'm looking at my watch, it says it is the 3rd of May, right? So 2 days ago, our grass stopped growing. And I'm being a little bit pedantic there, right? But the end of April, I've been doing fortnightly cuts or weekly cuts for my customers all year up until the end of April. And from the 1st of May, I can put the tools down and disappear for 6 to 8 weeks. And then in September, it starts growing again, but it's really October when it gets back to the full growth or enough growth to go back to weekly and fortnightly cutting.
Yeah.
So I think Melbourne's probably going to follow that, but it might vary a little bit. But
Yeah, I haven't mowed my lawn for probably 2 or 3 weeks, and it doesn't look like it needs to be mowed
yeah,
either. Like it's,
exactly.
yeah, not doing anything.
So give or take a few weeks, you're in the same ballpark.
Yeah.
And coming at the other end of the season, it'll probably be similar. But yeah, there's variation on that. I've talked to a couple of people down in Tasmania, and they get a longer winter. One guy down south of Hobart, I think in particular, he's like, it's never warm here, but it's green.
Yeah.
That's something I've noticed with all of Australia. But yeah, in my area, it's like once you get to this time of the year, I actually went and bought a ground thermometer and stuck it in the ground and started testing it. And we're looking for single digits is basically the sign that it's going to be change the pattern.
What sort of temperature did it get to in the do you check them warmer months as well?
As for the ground temperature,
Yeah.
I haven't actually done a consistent test of that. But yeah, the ground can get really hot and dry here. And this season we've just been in, we have had rain right through, even though they were predicting it was going to be drought. We've had rain right through. The ground has stayed dry. So if I, slightly sexual, but you lift the grass, stick your finger in, and there's no moisture there. And it's like that's not the way it should be. So if you start using product, you put a penetrant there, and you can help the rain to actually stick in the soil and do some more good. The grass has stayed green, but there's been a couple of times I've said to people right through the season, I said, we are a whisker away from drought. Because even though we've had rain, it's just washing off the surface. And it's only the last 2 weeks we've had downpours of 50 mils plus in one day that the ground has changed and it's now soggy. It doesn't answer your question about the temperatures in summer very well, but I'm pretty confident you'll find the ground temperature is going to be sitting in the high teens to low 20s most of the way through summer. And then you're obviously going to get your really hot days, which is going to bring the ground temp up hot enough to cook the grass.
Yeah. So what do you do in winter?
At the moment, because I'm on commercial industrial work, mostly gardening. There's plenty of gardening to do.
No.
And in summer, the gardening gets maintained. In winter, it gets restored. So I've got more time in winter to go through weed garden beds, get hedges tidied back up again if they weren't quite under control through summer, sort out fertilizers and get ready for the first lawn treatments when they come round.
And with the podcast, who are some of the guests you got coming up? Like, do you have a bank of guests all ready to go? Or
I don't actually. I'm always looking for guests. So I'm hoping the famous Joel Barnett might come on my podcast soon.
It can be arranged.
Yeah, we'll have to do that. There is the episode I've mentioned that I recorded this week. So Clint Adams coming out next week.
Yep.
And following that is a bit of a special one. A company that I've been chasing since I started the podcast and finally managed to get the right person in still.
Oh, nice.
So it took a while to crack through the hard shell and get through their marketing team. And then they assigned one of their head product managers to talk to me. And he reached out to me and we had a chat on the phone for like a couple of hours just in preparation for the podcast and then back and forth, bit of banter. And recorded that one yesterday.
Oh, nice. That'd be good.
So that's going to be coming up real soon. Other than that, I don't have any more that I can list and say this is what's coming.
Yep. Well, I don't think Luke's had anyone from Still on his podcast. So
I know he was trying when he did his what was it, a month that he was trying to get as many brands as possible in.
I think he had 13 episodes in a row or something.
Yeah. He did ask Still, but he wasn't able to coordinate it. And I was like, right, I'm going to get Still before Luke. Show him who's more competitive.
Well, Gary, last question for you is who do you think would be a good guest to have on the podcast?
On your podcast?
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a really good question. I'd like to say another person who does maintenance because I think there's a lot of value in that. But you're obviously going to be mostly looking for people who are in landscape construction and
Nah,
hardscaping.
I've had plenty of maintenance folks on.
Yeah. So, um, Matthew Wandmaker, have you interviewed him yet?
No.
Yep. He's not too far from you, and his business is phenomenal. He used to be a gyms, and then he left gyms after he grew to a size where he's like, the benefit of starting out with gyms was there. He's got nothing bad to say about it, but he reached a size where he's like, okay, gyms is no longer as beneficial as it was when he started. He's a really smart cookie.
What's his business called?
Oh, I'm going to have to double check that. Sorry. I should have that one on the tip of my tongue, but I don't have it. So I'll come back to you with that.
All right. No
But
worries.
yeah, he does. I noticed recently he's been doing some work with the Landscape magazine.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's a good one. Like I've heard Jim Penman interviewed a couple of times, and he's a fascinating listen. So yeah.
Yeah, I'd highly recommend interviewing Jim Penman.
You've had him on as
He's
well, haven't you?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah, I can listen to that one.
he's a fascinating person. I've got a lot of respect for him, and I know he gets a lot of hate, but you can sit there and poke fun at him and say, well, he might be on the autistic spectrum, or he might be this, or he might be that, might be arrogant, but he's learnt a lot. And it's kind of like what I'm saying by having interviewed 144 people, I've learnt quite a lot. But yeah, full respect to what he has learnt from doing what he's done.
Yeah, well, if you're not getting any shade thrown at you, you're not getting seen enough. Uh, it's
How do you find that? I've found probably in the last 3 months or so, I've copped a little bit of criticism on the podcast, and always cop a little bit here and there, like, oh, that episode was boring, or you need to be more enthusiastic or whatever. But only in the last few months, I've actually copped a little bit of criticism, which I've tried to shrug it off, but sometimes it bothers you.
yeah, well, it's just luck with how you react to things, but I'm fortunate that I absolutely love receiving it. Like when people have a go, write comments about Instagram posts that I do,
Yeah,
I buy it back every single time because I enjoy the back and forth of it.
yeah,
And yeah, any criticism, like even though I reply to it because I enjoy doing that, I couldn't care less what other people think about me. So,
yeah,
because who are they?
yeah,
Like I remember early when one of my kids was saying someone they got upset at school because someone said something mean about them. I said,
yeah,
who are they? Like, who's who's the kid though? And they said
yeah,
their name. But why does their opinion matter about
yeah,
you? Like, who cares what they think?
yep.
But
That's
it's
right.
easy for me to say that because that's my mindset. But I
Yeah.
understand not everyone's got the same mindset, so people can't see it the same way.
Yeah, and look, I've been a fairly sensitive person, so I tend to take feedback like that on probably more than you do. But I have shifted that mindset deliberately and gone, you know what, like you say, who are they? Why is it relevant? And is it something I should take seriously or something I should just go, yeah, I've heard it and put it aside? And yeah, one of the things I've done recently, probably before I started business, actually, so it's been over a large part of my adult life, is I've decided I need to reduce stress in my life. And so I've gone, all right, I'm going to change the way I drive. I'm not going to drive fast on the road. I'm just going to be sedate. And if you listen to my podcast, you'll know I love motorbikes. And I'm not saying I drive slow on the motorbike, but in general, I'm just going, all right, I don't need to get anywhere in a hurry. So prior to that, every opportunity to overtake, I would take it. Every chance to undertake up the left, I'd be, oh, can I do that? And then I'd say, all right, slow down, do the speed limit. Don't need to do 5 kilometers over the speed limit anywhere. I can just handle being in the traffic and deal with it. And recently, I've started finding that I get people in the traffic that agitate me, and it's like, why am I getting agitated by them? Whatever they're doing in the traffic, it's not my problem. And it's exactly like you're saying. If they're in a hurry, that's the same person I used to be. That should not agitate me.
Yeah, yeah. And
Just
I also have the same reaction to when people say positive things about me. Like
yeah,
I don't care about that either. Like I'll say thank
yeah,
you, but it doesn't affect me
yeah,
because someone might say something I did looks amazing, but I know like I might not have done certain elements of it or it's all a team effort. But so
Yeah.
I don't take anything personally, whether it's positive or negative.
Yep.
So I'm sort of more insular. Whereas if I'm happy with something, then I'm happy with it. If I'm not happy with it, I'm not happy with it.
Yeah. That's interesting to reach that point where you can sit with what people say and just go, all right, it doesn't need to impact me in any way.
Yeah, and it wasn't always like that, and it wasn't just a black and white. Just all of a sudden, that's how I thought. But just gradually how,
Yeah.
and it was Gary Vaynerchuk was what made me start to think like that.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that was a long time ago that I started that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
that's understand the mindset.
It's pretty powerful to be able to do that, I think, and to get to that point where you don't need to let other people bother you like that.
Yeah,
I had a situation like that in my personal life, and I've mentioned this to a couple of people, but I'm happy to say it publicly. My daughter she just turned 15, but a few years ago, as she was starting to hit puberty, she'd start to get a little bit argumentative with me or with her mum. And one day she was digging her heels in when her mum was telling her that she had forgotten to do something or needed to do something, or making it obvious, hey, you've you've done the wrong thing. And my daughter dug her heels in quite a bit. And then afterwards, I could still tuck her into bed and give her a hug good night at that point. I said, you know what? If you resist when mum tells you you've done something wrong, then you're giving mum power. If you dig your heels in and you take it personally and you get upset by it, you're giving mum power. And understand this. I'm not saying that mum doesn't have any power. I said, if you say, sorry, mum, I'll fix it. Or can I fix it after I've finished reading or finished what I'm doing? You're taking power in that situation. You actually, by not taking it personally, by going, okay, I've heard you, I agree with you, or I agree to a certain extent, or at the very least, I've heard you, let's move on. The power dissipates. The next day, I went to tuck my daughter into bed, and she said, you need to take your own advice, Dad. And I didn't draw the connection because I didn't know, like the way I tell the story makes it obvious. But when she said it, I was like, what do you mean? And she said, well, you got into an argument with Isaac, my son, and you didn't need to do that. You could have just said, okay, Isaac, and left it. I was like, right. I need to change my perspective, don't I? Out of the mouths of babes.
yeah, yeah. And yeah, and the same when you're talking about your driving. I find patience is a big key for a lot of things.
Yeah.
If you just sort of slow down, take a breath before you say something, you'll
Yep.
line up and not say what you would have said regrettably.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I've found that so many times when I'm tempted to want to get somewhere quick, or I'm tempted to want something to be done quicker than it should be done. It's just like, hang on a minute, pull back, take a breath. Who does it really matter with? What
Hmm.
does it really matter to you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, absolutely loved having this chat, Gary. I've yeah, thoroughly enjoyed it. So I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing your story.
No worries. Happy to talk, Joel. And I'll look forward to getting you into the dungeon to do an episode on Aussie Lawnstars.